one thing that I noticed based on some of the emails you get from some of these theater companies, um, it's somehow kind of like a more twisted version of what we get in publishing, in the sense that there's always this ego, right, in writing, right? People want to get famous, people want this, people want that. But with drama, like, it does tend to attract, like, it's in the word, right? Like, people that are kind of melodramatic, people that are really self-absorbed, right? Which is why they have such specific specifications for what they want to see. And it makes me wonder, like, the quintet itself. Like, I could definitely imagine a theater company that does this sort of thing, right? It's very possible that down the line, this can play to your advantage. We haven't talked about these plays together yet, so this is the first time that you're going to be hearing my thoughts on it. So first of all, I've read maybe like 10 of your plays altogether, and this is the most recent ones that I've read. This is by far my favorite of all the plays that you've done. And just to give people a little bit of background, so the Arthur Legends, maybe like scholars might disagree with this, but it doesn't seem to me like there's anything close to a truly like canonical King Arthur, right? Like there is no canon because the whole kind of point of it, I think, would emerge from all this is we just have like a bunch of stuff, most of it non-historical. We have a bunch of writers that got together. Some of them use the tales in ways that are conforming, I guess, to the earliest writings about Arthur. But it really veered off very quickly, probably because there's only so much that you could do with like the original Arthur tale, right? There's only so much that you could do with like tales about chivalry, tales about valor, tales about how wonderful that part of the medieval era was. So I get the feeling that consciously or not, many of the writers involved with the Arthur legend, they understood that we have to like push some boundaries and quickly, because this stuff is getting kind of stale. And characters, they appear, they disappear. And sometimes characters, they just undergo a complete metamorphoses. Like Morgan Le Fay, sometimes she is an ally of King Arthur. In other tales, she is a villain. In other tales, she is like outright evil, right? Depending on what you look at. And this kind of, we could even bring this into the modern day. Like the last like Arthur type book that I've read was like when I was a kid. I remember this book, The Eagle and the Sword, and it was based on a King Arthur that was just a really hyper violent sort of like sociopathic teenager. Which is why when I was first reading like the first play of the quintet, there was an Arthur there that as a child he seems to have this fascination with violence, and it made me wonder like how canonical is this? And when I researched this, it turns out there is no true Arthur canon. And it's interesting because I think that the quintet it does this wonderful thing where the kind of like metafictional aspects of the Arthur legends, it compresses that into 5 plays. Not even just in the plays themselves, but just how the characters develop. Like in the very first play, you have Arthur. He's mostly a teenager, or sometimes just like a very young boy with Merlin, and he also has a fascination with violence. And he seems to have like a profundity to him that you expect as the plays to go on. You expect that profundity to blossom. Maybe he's going to become a great man beyond merely like being like a great violent warrior. And that doesn't happen exactly, right? Instead, what we get is an Arthur that is more so kind of like the post like classic Arthur dramas, where he becomes kind of like this decadent king that sort of like sows the seeds of his own destruction in a way. And you do this, from one play to the next in a way where you give every kind of fraction of Arthur that exists, in these tales. And a little bit of all of that is part of the quintet now, which I found very interesting. So like it feels like you accept that as the Arthur trope, right? Like, and you kind of like you rework it into your own vision. I'm not sure if I would call it a black comedy, but there's definitely black comedy aspect throughout. A lot of it is just really, really funny. And again, you don't really get that in the past. By way of background, was there anything else? Oh, I wanted to ask you before I get to the specific plays. So you read Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. That's a classic book by Mark Twain. Probably maybe the second best book next to Huckleberry Finn. What did that book play in any way into like what you did with King Arthur here?
No, not really. Basically, I wanted to, as I said, give a Cassavetes feel in some areas. I wanted to rehabilitate Sir Gawain. I wanted to remove the magic from Merlin. The only quote-unquote magic comes from the fact that at certain points, 2 or 3 of the characters realize that they may be fictional characters, and there is the Great Watcher, which is the Danny Wagner character, which is a version of me that is possibly the creator. And so that substitutes for the old dragons and magic thing. There is perhaps a minor knight in most tales becomes a pretty important character, Sir Azrael, who appears after he has died, at least in the mind of Sir Gawain. I expand a character like Sir Dagonet, who is a minor court jester character. I make him a really great character. Other than Sir Gawain, he's my favorite character in the quintet. He's the fool as the wise man trope, but it plays in perfectly natural.
And he doesn't start that way, by the way.
Yeah.
At the beginning, Dagonet is just this minor character, and he's kind of annoying, just like the characters feel. But yeah, he definitely takes on a depth, but it's only as the plays emerge.
Yeah, and I also the most pure comedy is the fourth one with the Grail Quest, where I basically make the 3 Grail Questers, Bors, Percival, and Galahad into fools, even though it's called Two Fools, but it's not. Yeah. It's from a John Donne poem that every human being has 2 aspects of tomfoolery in them, and that I really play with the Percival myth. The Fisher King and other. We can get into it more in those plays, and then in the final play, I wanted to make Modred. I'm not a big Modred fan, but that play gives Modred a real motivation because it turns out that he is actually the lineal descendant. Arthur isn't. And one of the best things that I did in that play was I took a real life mythos, the Green Children of Woolpit, which is a myth that about these green children that emerge from a cave, from a land of twilight and whatnot. And as you know, I probably talked to you about when I drowned when I was 5 years old.
It's in true life, like that.
Yeah. And so I said, well, let me have Arthur and Morgause, his older sister, and Morgan Le Fay, his younger sister, be these 3 kids that emerge from a cave, seemingly. That's their tale, at least. Mm-hmm. And who are they? And so I try to shuffle the Arthurian myth to give it more of a grounding in reality, and I make the Fisher King really King Arthur's father there, and I make Modred really the descendant of Uther Pendragon, canonically Arthur's father. And I would disagree that there's not an Arthur canon. I think Thomas Malory canonized the Arthurian myth afterwards. People like the guy who did Idols of the King, Tennyson, and Marion Zimmer Bradley and T.H. White, the once and future king, they all feed off of Malory. So there's no canon until Malory. Malory is the great, there's a scientific term in the cosmos, the great attractor, where all of the cosmos seems to be heading towards the great, well, a large portion is heading towards this great void called the great attractor. In that sense, Thomas Malory is the great attractor of all the Arthurian myths that came before. And it should be stated that the best Arthurian tales aren't from the British Isles. A lot of the best tales come from Germany and the German provinces, where you get eventually the ring cycle and stuff with Parsifal and whatnot from Wagner. Say what you will about Wagner personally, but his Parsifal, even though it has a couple of technical flaws in terms of the history, is probably the best evocation of the Grail myth that there is.
Overall, would you say that Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is the best overall, like Arthur?
Yes, and one of the things when I was writing this play before the COVID hit, when I started the 5 cycle, I think it was in January, and I wrote over a 2.5, 3 month period, the 5 plays. There was this movie that was coming out with an Indian fellow, in fact, who was going to play Sir Gawain. It's just called Green Knight, and it's one of the few movies that I would have gone to see recently. I just have given up on movies as a popular art form, but it showed the Green Knight as some kind of to use comic book analogies, the swamp monster or the swamp beast or the swamp thing from either DC or Marvel. I'm not sure which it is. I think it's DC. And the Green Knight as an evocation of nature battling back against man. And I thought to myself, I'm going to make my Green Knight something seemingly mystical. And the Green Knight doesn't ever appear as the Green Knight in these plays. But anyway, we can get into it if you want to go into the first play.
Before that, the reason why I said I'm kind of skeptical of a King Arthur canon is, I mean, there is kind of like everything does stem from these kind of like earliest works, but it feels as if like so quickly like writers just move past that, right? They don't want to deal with they don't want to deal with the same tropes over and over again. It almost feels as if like the King Arthur trope, like when I think of it now, the King Arthur trope is exactly and precisely all the changes that King Arthur and all the kind of like sidekick characters end up going through, right? And the ways that Arthur gets emphasized or de-emphasized over time. And the reason that I brought up the Mark Twain book, Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, is for those that are not aware, so that's a novel that Twain wrote in which the protagonist just basically ends up somehow going back in time, and he realizes that he is in King Arthur's court, and he realizes that there actually is no magic in this area, and there is no actual chivalry. It's just a bunch of guys that are ignorant and dirty and stinky, and I could make fun of them, I could exploit them, and I could pretend to be the real magician simply by bringing like my modern 1800s scientific point of view to the world. Like I could, for example, predict a solar eclipse, which is the way that everybody starts kind of like almost worshiping him. That book, it's very comic in the sense that like he is like very much making, and it's also Cassavetes-esque, right? Which is what you said you were trying to do with these plays, because he's trying to present these characters as realistically as possible, like to the extent that he's exaggerating them for comic effects. Like, yeah, that's going on, but there is a realism there. I remember it was the first book that I read in which like the full kind of like brutality and like the lack of desirability of like that era, like it really came to the fore. I was thinking like, wow, like this really does capture what life must have been like, and nobody should have lived that kind of life. And like it just goes to show how even in the time of a Mark Twain, suddenly this King Arthur canon, like it's kind of like it's pressed through this like another like shuffle system, right? And coming at the end, like the best telling of the King Arthur legends up until that point in human history, what was Mark Twain, right? So there's like no respect for the canon in that sense.
I think it's certainly a great book. I lean more towards mixing Mallory with Cassavetes with Monty Python's Search for the Holy Grail, that movie. But the one point I would disagree with it. I think the second best Twain novel after Huckleberry Finn is Pudd'nhead Wilson. I'd probably put Connecticut Yankee third, but that's arguable.
Yeah, well, I've read that one too. There's fewer scenes from Pudd'nhead Wilson that come to me, although maybe overall it's probably funnier. But yeah, like who knows? Like I could reread those and change my mind.